Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at the first story from chapter 14 from the Road to Latin textbook. And this story is called Templa Antiqua. So just before we start, if you want to see this chapter, the story, the grammar, anything in more detail, like I always tell you, feel free to check it out on my website. The Nova Latin site has it all. There's a bunch of different things that'll help you through, including grammar notes, which will be useful when you're starting a new chapter, vocab practice, whatever it is you need, feel free to take a look. Before we dive into this story, though, I always say the first thing you need to do in a new chapter is get the vocab under control, because if you don't know the words, you're really going to struggle. So start there, do a Quizlet, a game, anything to practice, flashcards, whatever it is you need to do to make sure that you feel comfortable with the new set of vocab. And then your second step should always be to work your way through some of the grammar just so you can understand what you're reading. And I'll give you a little helpful advice on the new grammar in a second as we work our way through. But once you feel confident with the vocab, the grammar, then you want to read this story aloud, right? Practice your speaking, your pronunciation, and find someone who can read it back to you, right? Hopefully a classmate, anyone you can find that can speak it back to you with a pretty decent accent as well. That way you can work on your listening skills. And the more you do that, the more you're going to realize that by hearing the story, you're going to unlock a lot of the patterns and really understand the Latin a lot better. So you don't want to shut those skills off. You should always do that, right? I can't recommend that enough. But like I said, this chapter has a new set of grammar that we want to go over quickly before we start translating it. So we're coming back to the idea of grammatical gender, which is something that we've spoken about before. But you want to remember that Latin and a lot of languages, that like it or come from Latin, they use what we call grammatical gender, right? And it has to do with how the Romans viewed and classified their world. So there's two genders that we've seen so far, masculine and feminine. Masculine has to do with words that either are concerning men or things related to being manly, being a man, right, in the Roman view. Same thing with feminine, right? Those are things related to being a woman. So you see a lot of what we started with, the words that ended in A were feminine words like house, right, for instance. And the idea is, why would they think of a villa, a house, as being feminine? Well, that's where mom would spend a lot of her time, right, taking care of the house. There's a connection to women in the Roman mind. Now we're adding a third gender, which is called neuter. And neuter literally means neither in Latin. So this is usually reserved for words that are inanimate, there we go, objects, but not always. So this is the cultural understanding that we have to have, because to you might not think of a tree as having any gender, but to a Roman, right, arbor is a feminine word. So we have to understand that this is through the lens of the Romans and how they viewed the world, and not necessarily how we view the world. But to them, there is a third gender called neuter, right? And like I said, it usually is for things that are more inanimate objects, or things that just don't line up with being either masculine or feminine. So how does this play out? The idea we can wrap our heads around, but the actual grammar takes a little bit of practice. So these neuter nouns are going to be showing up specifically in the second declension. These are the two groups that we've seen so far. It'll show up later on in different declensions, but for now, this is kind of where we're at. So the words that end in US, we said, were second declension, second group, and they were masculine, right? The words that ended in A were what we call first declension, and they were feminine. What we're doing now is we're adding sort of an offshoot to second declension, and we're saying that there are, most of the words, or many of the words, I should say, do end in US. There's a bunch that actually end in UM, and this is the neuter ending. So if you look closely at the right columns, the center and right column, the second declension, you'll see that the endings are almost identical, right? The only difference is in the nominative singular, where we have UM instead of US, right? Masculine uses US, neuter uses UM. And down in the plural form, right? And the vocative would apply too. Remember, vocative and nominative are the same thing. But in the plural form, the nominative plural for masculine nouns is a long I. For neuter nouns, it's an A. And you want to notice that when you're dealing with neuter nouns, the key thing to remember is the nominative and the accusative are the exact same thing. So it doesn't really matter when you're talking about second declension singular, because we're used to seeing an accusative singular ending of being UM. But when you get to the plural, it becomes more obvious what's happening here. The nominative plural is an A, and the accusative plural is also an A. So we're going to have to unpack in this chapter the idea of how you can tell which one you're looking at, because nominative and accusative represent two completely different things. So that's part of the trick of practicing in this chapter, is to make sure we understand what neuter nouns look like and how we can figure this all out. And you want to remember that you can tell that a noun is neuter if you look in the dictionary. because it will be a second declension noun, meaning that the genitive singular will be a long I, but the nominative singular will be a UM, right? So it looks distinctly different. And if you're not sure, look it up in a dictionary and it'll tell you the gender either way. You'll be able to kind of go from there. So that's a very quick overview of what we're looking at in this chapter. If you're stuck, pause the video, go back, read through the grammar notes, make sure you feel pretty good so that you understand what we're doing when we translate this story. But if you feel like you're in a good place, follow along because we're going to just work on the story right now. So the story starts with templum est Athenes, okay? So here we have the word templum. Now, it could either be, it's a neuter word, right, temple. It could either be nominative singular or accusative plural. Here it's nominative singular. You're saying there is a temple in Athens, right? Templum est antiquum. The temple is ancient or old, right? Again, templum is functioning as your subject, right? You can tell by the context of the sentence. We're not saying someone sees a temple or anything like that. We're just saying the temple is, right? The temple is old. So this is an example of where you have the nominative singular for the neuter being a UM, okay? Then you have incolai Athenarum, templum saipe intron. So here we have something interesting. We have the word templum again, but you'll notice I colored it in blue, which means it's an accusative, a direct object. Why is that the case? Well, it's because we have the word incolai, which means the inhabitants. That's functioning as my nominative plural subject, okay? And it makes sense because we have the verb intront, which is also plural. So we need a plural subject. If templum was my subject, it would be singular. You can't have a singular subject going with a plural verb. So there's a couple different clues telling you here that templum is not actually my subject. It's the direct object. Another reason you can tell is the verb is to enter, right? A temple can't enter anything. Someone would enter a temple, if that makes sense. So even the context of knowing the vocabulary and understanding what's happening is telling you this is not your subject, right? So it's the inhabitants of Athens. There's your genitive plural, right? Athenarum. The inhabitants of Athens often enter the temple, templum. So there's your example of the neuter noun, right? Second declension, neuter noun, having an accusative singular ending, the UM. And that's what we've been used to so far with second declension, right? Seeing the UM being a singular direct object, right? That's what it's doing here. Then you have incolai in templum ambulant quod columnas et statuas libenter spectant. So here again, we have templum, but it's a prepositional phrase. So it's not going to be the subject. It's the direct object. Someone is going into a temple, right? In templum. My subject is incolai again. The inhabitants walk ambulant in templum, into the temple, right? Because they libenta, they gladly or happily, you might say, spectant, look at, right? They look at, what do they look at? The columnas et statuas, the columns and the statues, right? This chapter is called Templa Antiqua, right? Ancient temples. It's telling you about what they look like, specifically Greek temples, right? So the image to the right is showing you the Parthenon in Athens, right? You can see it's a pretty traditional temple. You have the columns on the outside, and there would be statues on the inside, right? That's what the people come to look at. Then you have proximi templos sunt multiviri. So proximi means near, right? Multiviri is really your subject. So you're saying there are sunt, many men, near, right? Proximi, so multi-weary, many men are, sunt, proximi, are nearby. And remember, proximi is one of those special adjectives that takes dative because you're going to be near to something, right? Near to the temple. There's your ablative, right, form. So remember, second declension neuter nouns, they use the same endings as our second declension masculine. So that long O ending should stand out as being dative. I think I just said ablative before. It's dative. So you're saying there are many men nearby to the temple, right? That's what's happening there. Then we continue on. You have columnae pulchrae templi viros delectant. So here, again, templi is not my subject. Templi is genitive singular, right? So you want to think of second declension. What am I really looking at here? The reason I say that is because with other second declension nouns, we've seen the long I ending can be a plural subject, right? Nominative plural. So you might think this is saying the temple's delight. The problem is temple is neuter, right? So the long I is not the nominative plural ending. If it were nominative plural, it would be an A. Okay, so this has to be genitive. You're saying the columnae pulchrae, that's my subject. The beautiful columns delight the viros templi, right? And templi is going with columna. So you're saying the beautiful columns of the temple delight viros, the men, meaning people have come to look at the temple. They're seeing these beautiful columns, and the columns are delighting them, right? They enjoy them. Okay. Then you have in templo. Here's ablative because we're inside the temple, right? So in the temple, est magna statua Dei sapientiae. So there is a magna statua, a large statue of the goddess of wisdom. These are genitive, right? And again, they can't be anything else. That AE ending, you might be thinking, oh, it's nominative plural. It could be, except your verb is singular, est, so it wouldn't match up. So in terms of the context, the only thing that makes sense here is for it to be genitive. So you're saying inside the temple there is a large statue of the goddess of wisdom. This is talking about the Parthenon, right, in Greece, and it's a statue of Athena, right? The goddess of wisdom is Athena. Then you have proximae statuae sunt arai, right? So arai means altars, right? So altars are proximae, they are near, right? Again, this is the idea of when you're near something, you're near to something. Statuae here is a first declension noun. You might be thinking, well, is it nominative plural? Is it genitive singular? It wouldn't be nominative plural, because then you'd be saying the statues are near the altars, which kind of doesn't make sense because we just said there's only one statue, so it wouldn't be statues. The better way to do it is to reverse that order and say the statues, the arai, the altars rather, are near the statue, right? They are nearby to the statue, dative. That's what you're doing here. And it's because there's only one statue in there, and it's saying, close to, right, proximae, nearby, there are altars, right, which is where the sacrifice will be done. Then you have feminae, aras, dei ornat. So women, there's your subject, women decorate, ornat. They decorate the altars. Aras is your plural direct object, right? The altars of the goddess, genitive, meaning of Athena, right? So there were women, priestesses, who would decorate the altars of the temple, okay? Then you have agriculae, frumentum ad aras templi portant. So farmers carry, portant. What do they carry? Frumentum. It means like corn or grain. It's sort of like crops, right? The things they grow is really what it is. But you could say grain if you want to. They carry grain to the aras, to the altars of the temple. Templi is genitive singular. So it's talking about farmers bringing basically like donations, dedications, or dedicating things to the goddess Athena. They would bring their crops to the altar, right, as sort of a sacrifice. Then you have nautai, aurum a terris extremis in templum portant. So sailors, right, nautai, the sailors, portant, they carry aurum, gold, right? So and it's talking about people bringing the things they produce. So farmers bring grain or corn. The sailors carry aurum, they carry gold, right? Because they're merchants is kind of the idea. Gold from far off lands, terris extremis, right? Far off lands into the temple, in templum. So the sailors are showing up with gold, right? Because they're merchants is the idea. Then you have sic viri et feminae templi deam adorant. So thus, or in this way, men and women, they adorn or they decorate or you might say they worship rather, the deam templi, the goddess of the temple. So again, the men are the farmers and the sailors. The women are probably more talking about like priestesses, although it could be just everyday women, I guess, coming in and decorating things. But the adorare, right, again, it's talking about worshiping. So it's saying this is the way that they worship the goddess of the temple, meaning the goddess Athena, right? They worship her in different ways according to kind of what they do, right, what their job is. Then you have the last paragraph. You have hodie quoque templa antiqua viros et feminas delectant. So today, right, today too. And when we have the word today here in Road to Latin, it's talking about in modern times, right? So the authors are saying even today, right, hodie quoque. And here we have Templa Antiqua. So this is where a lot of my students will get confused. And this is where it's really important to know the gender. At first look, that looks singular, the ancient temple. But you have to remember that templum is a neuter word. And if you think second declension neuter, if you look at a noun ending chart, the only place you're going to see the A ending is either nominative or accusative plural. So we're talking about temples here. So this is a really important change you have to make because we've been used to seeing the A be a singular noun for so long, right, for 13 chapters. And now we're saying, no, if it's a neuter noun, it's actually not singular, it's plural. It's the plural subject in this case. The reason we know is viros et feminas are both accusative plural. You can tell by the OS and AS ending. So they have to be our direct object. We don't need another one. So it makes more sense in the context to be the plural subject. Now, if we look at our verb, delectant is plural with the nt ending. So it makes sense that you'd have a plural verb, a plural subject. They go together. You're saying today, too, the ancient temples, or just ancient temples, plural, delight viros et feminas, men and women, meaning in modern times, we still like to go and look at temples, right? Which is true. People go and visit these all the time. Then you have a terris extremis ad Graeciam navigan, okay? So they sail to Greece from far-off lands, a terris extremis, right? From far-off lands, they sail to Greece, okay? And I'm assuming the authors are still talking about modern people, right? Although I guess you could have flown, right? But, at this book, maybe we're not talking about commercial airlines in 1930, whenever this was written. So you'd sail. Sure, why not, right? Then you have Templa Clara intrant et laudat. Now here, we have the same kind of thing happening. We have a neuter noun that ends in an A, Templa. But in terms of the context, this, right, again, the A ending is either nominative plural or accusative plural. If it were the subject, you'd be saying the temples enter, which doesn't make any sense. So the context is kind of shifting the other direction, saying this is your direct object. They enter, meaning men and women, right, coming to Greece. They enter the famous temples, the Templa Clara. And again, remember, it's plural because you have a neuter noun. Okay, so they enter the famous temples and they praise, laudant, they praise the famous temples, right? So they show up, they enter, and they're like, these are great, right? It's nice to see these beautiful temples, right? Then you have etiam hodie columnae templorum antiquorum sunt pulchrae. So even today, etiam hodie, right, the columns of the ancient temples, templorum antiquorum is genitive plural. So even today, the columns of ancient temples sunt pulchrae, they are beautiful, which is true, right? This picture is showing you the Parthenon in Greece. It is intact, right? Mostly intact. It's missing a lot, but still you can see the columns and they are beautiful, right? So that's the comment the authors are making, right? They're still beautiful. Then you have proxima magnis templis sunt multa domicilia parva. Okay, so my subject is really multa domicilia parva, right? So many small dwellings, you might say, small homes are proxima, they are near to the large temples, magnis templis, okay? So it's saying nearby to the large temples, there are many small houses, right? Many dwellings, domicilia parva. Okay. Then you have inculae Graeciae longas fabulas de templis antiquis narrant. So the inhabitants of Greece, I'm assuming we're still talking about modern times, they narrant, they tell longas fabulas, long stories about templis antiquis, about ancient temples. And again, there we have our ablative, right, going with de. Templis is still neuter, and it's just showing you what the accusative plural, or rather the ablative plural looks like. And remember, it's going to look the same as a masculine second declension noun. But it's just to help you practice and kind of see these different forms, okay? So saying even today, the people of Greece are still telling stories, right? Long stories about the ancient temples. So hopefully this story wasn't too bad to translate. The only twist, again, is they're using the word temple here very cleverly because temple is a neuter second declension noun. So they can repeat, the authors are repeating the word temple and showing it to you in a couple different contexts so that you can understand that it has the same endings as second declension masculine, except when you're talking about nominative and accusative, right? That's where there's a difference between, a masculine and a neuter noun. So the more you read this story and practice it, the easier you're going to be able to recognize what's going on here. And there's a second story in chapter 14 that really hammers it home by giving you more neuter nouns. But this is just a nice taste to get you used to neuter nouns, what they look like, so you can practice them. So again, read this. Make sure that the way you read it and translate it kind of matches up with what we just did, and you should be in a pretty good place. But like I always tell you, the more you read and the more you practice, the easier this is going to be. Neuter nouns are tricky. For all my students, this is always where we start to fall off the rails a little bit and get confused. So it's just a matter of practice. If you have any questions at all or need anything, feel free to put it in the comments below. But otherwise, keep at it and good luck.